Welcome to the Passive Mobile Home Park Investing Podcast with your host, Andrew Keel. This is the podcast where you can get the education you need to invest 100% passively in the highly profitable niche of mobile home parks.
Welcome to the Passive Mobile Home Park Investing Podcast. This is your host, Andrew Keel. And today we have an amazing guest in Mr. Derek Vickers with the Vicktory Real Estate Group. Before we dive in, I want to ask you a real quick favor. Would you mind please taking an extra 30 seconds and heading over to iTunes to rate this podcast with 5 stars? This helps us get more listeners, and it means the absolute world to me. So thanks for making my day with that 5-star review of the show. All right, let's dive in. Derek started his mobile home park investing journey with his first purchase in September of 2020, after 10 years in the insurance business as a sales manager. He currently owns and operates 2,000 lots across 38 different mobile home parks throughout the Southeast United States, 23 of those mobile home parks being in the beautiful state of Florida. Vicktory Real Estate Group specializes in turning around neglected mobile home parks by increasing occupancy, converting park-owned homes to tenant-owned, and reducing operating expenses. With a busy schedule, Derek enjoys spending time with his wife and daughter and has another baby on the way. Derek, we're excited to welcome you to the show.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to be on the show, honored to be on the show, and excited to get this rolling. And hopefully I can drop some nuggets and help some people out in their MHP journey.
I love it, man. And congratulations on the baby news. That is fantastic for you and your wife.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And so we're working, my wife wants, 4 or 5. So we still have a ways to go, but the second one will obviously bring some additional fun.
My wife always says the hardest jump, because we have 3, the hardest jump was from 0 to 1. So you're ahead of the game, brother.
Ahead of the game. Good.
Well, maybe you can start out by telling our listeners a little about your story and how you got into manufactured housing.
Yeah. So, it's interesting because people always have a little strange journey, how they end up in this little niche investment world of mobile home parks. And so mine is pretty unique in that, as Andrew mentioned, I was in the insurance business for 10 years and I did really well in that. I started out, it was really tough, but, cold calling businesses, it was a difficult grow to where I got. And I was doing well. I was making good money in that business. And I had been studying different guys online. And I knew the end goal was always to get into some sort of investment real estate. And so we sold insurance to businesses. And 2020, March of 2020, businesses shut down.
Yeah.
So we couldn't sell insurance to businesses. We were doing it, but it was so slow. And I'm like, okay, that was the push and the boost I got to like, okay, I got to get this real estate thing going. And so I started looking at multifamily apartment deals and, I didn't want to buy a duplex. I didn't want to buy a quadplex. I wanted to go a little bit bigger and get some more scale. And so, it just didn't work because the barrier to entry to multifamily is huge. I mean, then, it's like $250,000, $300,000 a door. And so I had a friend that was in the mobile home park business and he was like, hey, you should look at mobile home parks. So I started listening to podcasts. This podcast actually included in that. And I think, Andrew, you told me that's when you started the podcast in 2020 there. So I started listening to all these podcasts and then I was sold after that. I'm like, okay, wow, like this, I love this business model. And so what I did, I actually went online. I'm like, okay, what do I need to do to start, at least advancing the ball here? And so I found a list online of all of the mobile home parks in Florida, like miraculously, like it was so easy. Like, I don't even know how I did it. I just typed in, I'm like, okay, here's a list of all the parks. And so I started calling owners. I'm like, okay, I'm going to make a fool out of myself here. I don't know that much about the asset class yet. I'm learning, but still, I don't know how to have that conversation with an owner about the intricacies of operations. But I had lots of experience in cold calling businesses. And actually, this was really easy for me to pick up the phone because I used to have to call people and go see them in person to try and sell them something. So this was a dream come true because I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm calling someone and offering to buy from them. Like, oh my gosh, like this is going to be easy. So I had no like call reluctance. And so I started calling, and I literally drove probably, every single mobile home park just about between Hillsborough County, Orange County, up to Ocala, around the Central Florida area. I literally drove, maybe not all of them, but I drove like a good majority of them. And I was talking to owners. I would, put in offers on stuff. Didn't know how I was going to get the deal done. Got offers rejected, got hung up on, got told to screw off because your offer sucked and all that. And so my buddy that was in the business actually introduced me to a capital partner that he had that actually lived, right down the road from me in Orlando. And so I went and met him and told him what I was doing. And he was like, oh, okay, cool. So I started sending him deals that I was finding, because I was finding a bunch of deals, and he would kind of, he had a lot of experience in like the high financial world. So he was showing me, hey, look at this, look at this. Okay, that's a good deal. That would be good for your first deal, or it wouldn't. So we started to create a relationship there. And I know this is maybe getting a little long-winded, and so basically I got a call from him one day, and he's like, hey, I had a deal under contract. My partner backed out. We're closing in a week. Do you want in? And I was like, I'll call you back. I said, I'll call you back tomorrow. And then I ended up calling. I got off the phone, and I'm going through my head. I'm like, dude, just call him back now. So I called him back like 10 minutes later, and I'm like, I'm in. And I got into that deal. I wanted to learn the business. I wanted to learn the operation. So I was like, okay, I'll do all the heavy lifting on this deal. And so basically, I got in that deal with no money. So people that say, if your excuse is you don't have any money, you don't have to have any money. Okay, by the way. But I got in that deal, did all the heavy lifting, and got 20% of the entire deal for doing all of that heavy lifting. And so that's how I got into the business. And then it just kind of started going crazy after that. We started, I kept finding these, like, we never meant to get to the size that we're at today. Well, I take that back. So like when I do something, it's always like, I can't halfway something. I have to sort of go all in. So there was some intention there to get big, but not really at the beginning. But we just kept finding these great deals, and like you couldn't pass on them. So it was like, then it started to get crazy, and we acquired more. But that's the gist of how I got into the business.
Wow, that is an awesome story. I have some notes here. So it seems like your strength initially was the sales side of things, but then you came in, helping out with the heavy lifting part of it, right? The value add, the implementation of the management company, I assume. So how do you balance those two when you're growing so fast? I mean, your first park was September of 2020. And I mean, we're recording this in November 2022. And I think in your intro, there was how many parks? 38?
38. Yes. Yes.
Wow. So yeah, how do you balance the two, and maybe tell us about some of your struggles from, the acquisitions business versus the property management business versus the construction management business? Because that's something that we've struggled with in-house.
Yeah. And that is, I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of people don't talk about that, the construction management aspect of it on these value add properties, because I didn't know anything about project management, construction management. I had no idea when we were getting these turnaround properties that a lot of that was going to be involved. And I struggled with that because contractors, they are what they are. I mean, they're difficult to find one that you can trust. It's difficult to find one that you can rely on regularly. And I've had experience where a lot of them I can rely on for a little bit and then not. But, balancing that was difficult because I was still in the insurance business full time until August of 21, until it just got,
Oh, wow.
ridiculous that it couldn't work. But how do you balance it? You know, you don't really. You just you got to go and get it done. Like I was working in my office, and this is kind of funny. So I like in the insurance business, I was like, I would wear a suit, a tie, and I would even put on a vest sometimes during the day. Right. So I was all fancied up. And then, so this first property we bought was probably 10 or 15 minutes from my insurance office. So I would change down into like a t-shirt and some comfortable shorts and then go to the park from 5 to like 8 doing what we have to do. And by the way, that property was an utter disaster. I was chasing homeless people drug addicts out of the vacant park-owned homes every single day for 2 months. For 2 months. It was a lot of fun, a lot of fun. And so, yeah, it was, it was difficult to balance all that. I would go home after that and I'd be up doing stuff till, 3 o'clock in the morning. And I would get up at, 5 o'clock in the morning and go to the gym and just, figure out how to get it all done. And it wasn't easy, but you just, you figure it out.
Yeah. And then tell us about some of the challenges, right? So COVID hit March 2020, your first park, was closing in September. Tell us about some of the challenges you went through there to get that first deal done.
Well, the first deal, when I mentioned that before, there was no there was no due diligence because the property was closing in 7 days.
Oh,
and
geez.
That's when I just got told about the property that we were closing. And so it was just kind of, there wasn't really that much struggle leading up to it because it was so sudden that I didn't even have time to think about it. And, we get on site and, half the park septic, half the park city water and city sewer that we didn't know. And, all kinds of other fun coffins that we found there.
You must have had some trust in that friend of yours to dive in, that quick without the due diligence. That's cool. I know before we started recording, you actually live like 15 minutes from where I live in Oviedo. So We're both Central Florida boys. Yeah. Let me ask you this. So I know you said you listened to some podcasts, but was there anything else, that you did to self-educate on mobile home parks before kind of diving in to cold calling?
Yeah. So I did the Frank and Dave boot camp and it was all virtual then. So I did that. I listened to other commercial real estate podcasts and I actually looked up commercial real estate nomenclature and defined all those terms and banking terms and things. So I would sort of understand that. But I think a combination of that, the podcasts, actually going out and talking to owners and asking them questions about operations, actually going there and asking, hey, how does this work? And how does this work? And how does that work? Mom and pop, they've got their own issues. But I was at least able to learn from some of these guys, how, parks operated. And then the boot camp was great. And then the interesting thing, about that first park, it literally violated everything in the buy box on the boot camp. It's half city water and, half septic. It was all park owned homes, terrible, dilapidated park owned homes.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, it was probably so that first park was probably I learned on level 10 at level 1. So there was no gradient. It was just all in.
Yeah. I was telling somebody yesterday that if my first park, I got the best manager, she still manages the park to this day. She's just a rock star. If that first park, didn't go as well as it did, I might have tapped the brakes a little bit. I'm just naturally conservative. So I would have been okay, I can't take on too much too fast. But, you had the opposite. You were just thrown right into the mess and dig your way out. So that's really interesting. Let me ask you this. What do you think is the toughest hurdle to overcome in mobile home park investing?
Well, I think getting that first deal done is definitely a hurdle for some people. I know when I was just, digging around before I got that opportunity, it was just, there's a lot of stuff that's going through your head. You're doubting, are you overanalyzing and this and that. So I think that's, a hurdle. And then also, I think me personally, I underestimated the amount of work that's involved in some of these turnaround projects and underestimating the amount of time and expenses it takes to do that because, these value add properties, you can't if you're flipping park owned homes to tenant owned homes and you can't hire a manager for $500 a month and free lot rent. That's at least a 40-hour a week job. Yeah. And so the level of work you're going to get by doing that is very low. So I think people just sort of underestimate kind of the work involved and the things that are actually involved in this because it's just the operations can be tough, and I underestimated that.
Yeah, no, I think that a lot of new operators, including myself, do that because you're exactly right. It is a ton of work. And, I think through some of the boot camps and things like that, I mean, Frank pretty much tells it how it is, but you kind of get this impression like, okay, the tenants will own their homes and it's this passive deal. They're just paying lot rent. You're not supposed to have the repairs and maintenance. I know with your model where you're converting park-owned homes to tenant-owned homes, there's a lot more involved, but I think you kind of get sold on this. Hey, this is going to be, passive, very hands-off. And it's not. It's affordable housing. You need to be hands-on because things can get way out of whack. And I think one thing that we've done to like really stay on that is we visit all of our properties at least once a quarter. I don't know if you guys, I mean, you're Florida based, so you probably get to them, more often than that. But if we didn't go to these, the managers are notorious for doing the drive-through videos and skipping. Really quickly, they'll go by lot 13, which has the refrigerator in the front yard, and there's a dryer in the back, by the skirting. We've seen it all. So
Yeah.
that's been really valuable. But yeah, I agree with you. There's a ton of work involved. And then you said, your first deal, getting into your first deal. And one thing resonated with me. My mentor, Ryan Smith with Elevation Capital, he told me about his first mobile home park, which was I believe it was in Tennessee. And he was telling me like he literally got sick before the closing. Like he literally got sick because he was just so nervous. And now he has 20,000 plus units, so I think that first deal, that your nerves are running and people are telling you, what are you doing? I remember my dad. I was like, Dad, I'm going to buy a trailer park. And he was like, Andrew, I think you're making a huge mistake. All of your savings, you're going to lose all of it. And I was like, no, I think, this is a good business. And he's like, Andrew, I don't think you know what you're doing. But it turned out to work out. He had never, heard of this as like an investment option. So very cool.
That's great, man. I remember that before I closed the first deal too. It was like I was in the office and I'm like, okay, I got to get these, these welcome letters out. And I was like super nervous to go there and hand those out and knock on the doors at that property. And that property was a yucky, nasty property. So it was even more exciting. But I totally,
and the same thing, like you were saying, like it's all the little things that you're like, oh, how hard could it be? You just need to prepare an intro letter and get it out to the tenants. But the way my mind works is like, okay, what liability is this intro? Like, is this worded right? Do I need to have an attorney review this to make sure I'm not saying something I shouldn't, or I'm, talking indefinites instead of, otherwise. So yeah, I think there's a lot of nerves running at the same time. So that's, I remember the first one. Yeah, it's definitely a hard one. Let me ask you this. What does your mobile home park investing strategy look like today? And, has that changed from when you bought that first park? And, why is it the way it is now?
Yeah. And so we're still kind of in the process of figuring that out because with interest rates, it's just made the market really, really weird in that, we can buy some of these value add properties, these all park owned homes, and hope to convert them over to tenant owned homes. But then we have to pay the seller for what we're going to do. And, it just doesn't make sense after knowing all the work that goes into it. And I was talking to one of my business partners a few weeks ago about this, and he asked me the same question, like, would you buy those same properties again? And I said, yes, at the price that we got them at that point in time. But if we've got to pay up for those, I'm not going to do it because it's just a lot of work and the upside wouldn't be there. We actually purchased the park. I think I was telling you about. It's right there in a suburb right outside of Orlando back in May of this year. We paid for it, probably paid too much for it, but it was all tenant-owned homes. The mom and pop owner took fantastic care of the property. And like, you don't even have to be there. Like it's very stable. And so I like that. Cash flows less. Well, we'll make more money over time. We'll create more value over time. But it's a balance. And so I guess I don't really have a definitive answer to that question right now. But if we can still get these value add parks at a reasonable price, then we'll move on them. But if not, I just don't think the effort required is worth the upside if you're paying for some of that upside up front.
Yeah, that's a really good insight there. I think it's like when you first get in, you don't know what you don't know, right? And you're just like, hey, and you can work through it, right? And it's been a
Right.
great past, 7 years. So it was easy to kind of ride the cap rate compression and to, create a lot of value. It's not that it's not hard work, but you create a lot of value really fast,
Yep.
and we were beneficiaries of that. But now it's like, okay, let's step back and see what works the best, right?
Yep.
Buying fewer park owned homes is a huge part of that, right? When tenants own their homes, it's been proven in our portfolio, literally less than 5% of the tenant owned homes move out and leave per year. So the park owned homes have a much higher turnover rate. I posted something on LinkedIn. It was yesterday or the day before. And another operator commented, he said, when the economy gets rough, it's the park owned homes that you need to worry about because there's higher chances of them turning over, right? And, their higher monthly payment, they'll just abandon the homes. You're one water leak away from them just walking out and leaving
Yep.
behind, all they've paid for that home and so forth. So I would love to get your feedback on that, on like how you guys convert these parks from park owned homes to tenant owned homes, because I love the model, but is it like through a lease option type of program? Or do you just say, hey, we're going to give you the home and your lot rent's just going to, go down, or what does that look like?
Yeah, so it's been a variation of all that. We give everybody the opportunity to purchase their home. They have to pass the background check
Mm-hmm.
because mom and pop probably never did a background check. So we have to make sure, because we're going to be moving families into these parks. We want to make sure that we don't have any criminals, any sex offenders in there. We have to make sure of that, right? A lot of the properties that we bought, there was a lot of vacant park owned homes. So we would just sell those as a, handyman special
Mm-hmm.
for $500. So we never underwrote like the price we would sell the homes for
Mm-hmm.
in our deals. And so we didn't really care what we sold them for because we wanted a good family there or a good individual there that was going to pay lot rent every month and not cause any trouble. And so we would do it various ways. And sometimes if people had a nicer house, we would do like a rent to own or a lease option with them. Or we would sell for 500 or $1,000. But, in some of the markets that we're in, like the Tampa and Orlando markets, I mean, it's so hot. These things are easy to
Easy to
sell.
sell.
And
Yeah.
even like, what we learned on that first property we bought, because so it was 22 lots. And I think 10 or 12 of those were vacant park owned homes and they were a disaster, but we were able to sell those for cheap and people came in and fixed them up. We gave them free lot rent until they had the home fixed. And so it was a great deal for them. And, I was looking at our numbers and it was something crazy. Like, in the last year, we brought back online like I don't know, something like, 400 homes of affordable housing in our different
Wow.
markets that weren't available, that families did not have before that. And I think that's the cool thing about our business is that you get to provide that to people that, I mean, they may never get the chance to own like a home, but this like we've had people in our parks buy homes and then they're reselling them for double the value.
Yeah.
Like they're making
That's
money
awesome.
off of them. Like
That's
we had a
great.
guy who bought a house. I can't remember how much he paid for it, but he put maybe 10 or 15 grand in it and then he sells it for 60 grand. Like,
That's awesome. Yeah.
so it's pretty cool.
That's really good. So you mentioned one thing, that park had 22 lots. Another thing is, the size of the parks, right? That's one thing that I've learned at least is that, we have a new criteria. We don't touch anything under 50 lots. And, I would just love to get your opinion on that. Are you guys, buying these smaller parks? Do you have a better way to manage them? Or, are you able to still hit the industry standard of a 35% expense ratio on those smaller parks? And what does that look like? Because I know that we are trying to buy, more of the scale, like you talked about earlier.
Yeah, we would rather buy scale now because it doesn't make sense to buy a 30 lot park unless it's right next door. If we have something
Yeah.
that right next door, it fits into the machine, it's right there, we'll take it down. But in our areas that we're at now in Florida, like we're not going to buy something in the middle of nowhere, Florida, of 30 lots because you're going to have to pay a manager. If it's a turnaround property, I know all the issues that are going to come with that. So it doesn't necessarily make sense to actually do that. And I know when you're starting, you have to look at those things, but that's where we would want more scale now for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And sorry, what I was going to say is your expenses, if you're operating that park, as you mentioned, your expense ratio is going to be higher. We can throw, if we buy a 40 lot park in Tampa, we can just throw it in and our managers are already there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's nice when you have scale somewhere. What mistakes have you made, in mobile home park investing that we could learn from?
Oh, well, where do I start? So I definitely think if you're buying value add properties, and I touched on this earlier, is that, it's a lot of work, and I would not underestimate that. And you cannot hire someone and pay them the free lot rent and $500 a month. It just doesn't work. You're going to get sketchy people, and so you have to look out for that and really be, you really have to look at who you're hiring and are they going to be able to do the job? Are they reliable? And are you paying them enough? Because that's just a big thing. You need to get reliable and trustworthy people on your team. Okay. And then you also need to actually look at, what those people are doing on a daily basis. So that is one. Due diligence, make sure you're going through all of your due diligence checklists. Check the utilities. If you have to spend an extra couple $1,000 to scope the lines or have septics pumped out, do it. Okay, do it. And always, always, always do your due diligence. We had a property in Tampa that we bought. So we bought a lot of these properties that are 50, 60% vacant. So we didn't take into account the old infrastructure that was already there. It wasn't ready for the capacity to be 100% occupied. So we underestimated it's all city water, city sewer, but sewer backups, water line breaks from the old infrastructure. And so all of that is needs to be taken into account. And check septics, just check them, because we have a deal now that, the septic, it was another disaster. It's the same septic system that it had when it was in the 50s. And we made the mistake. We were getting the park cheap enough to where we just, plugged our noses, didn't really check the septics and assumed that it was fine. And now we're having to tap into city water and sewer, which is right out front, but it's like, that's a tough process to do. It's taken us about a year and we're still not done with that project yet. So I would definitely look at those couple things for sure.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing those. Yeah. The due diligence piece resonated with me. When we started, we used the due diligence handbook that you got at the MHU boot camp, and that was an awesome starting point. But literally from every deal that we've done, we've learned at least one thing and added it to our due diligence checklist.
Sure.
Like, hey, we gotta do this next time. We got to make sure to meet with this person or talk to them about this. And now our due diligence checklist is well above 300 items now.
Yeah.
Where in the beginning in the handbook, I think it was closer to like 50 or 60.
Right.
So
right.
It just grows as the longer you're in the business, you just keep adding to that. So that's a really, really important piece, especially with the infrastructure, because that can be costly, can be super costly.
Yeah.
What are the most important things that passive investors, we're talking LPs here, what are the most important things that LPs and passive investors need to look out for when investing into mobile home parks?
Yeah, I mean, I think, a couple of things that as an LP, I think you should really, try to understand the asset class a little bit. So if you have, a sponsor that's showing you a pro forma for a park and they're, banking on the park running on 20% expenses, like, this is probably not going to happen. The park's got a wastewater treatment plant and, it's a well. You and I both know it's not going to run at 20% expenses. It's just not.
No.
And so I would just try to understand that a little bit so you can see if the numbers are making sense and what, these pro formas look like. And also the operator themselves, obviously, like, even if they don't have experience, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be a bad operator. Look at prior experience that they had in other businesses. Were they successful? and how are they as a person? What do they do in their spare time? If you can get that kind of detailed, but I would definitely look at those things.
That's great. Those are great tips. Thank you for those. What does the perfect mobile home park look like in your eyes, and why?
Yeah, so perfect mobile home park for me would be in the, one of these larger MSAs in Florida. They would be all park owned homes, like 90s homes or above, and 100 lots or more, of course, city water, city sewer, all direct build, trash is direct build, everything, right? That would be the perfect park for me, and you would have to get that at a relatively decent price. But that would be my perfect mobile home park.
Yeah, that'd be the Great White Buffalo right there, and get it at like a 10 cap, right? Like get it
Of
where it's
course.
a really great price. Yeah, that
Yeah.
sounds awesome. Let me ask you this: what does the future of mobile home park investing look like, and how do you see mobile home parks fitting in with the direction the economy is going with higher interest rates and possible recession?
Yeah, and so I think with what I loved about this business was the supply and demand factor. It's always going to be on our side. So I think that bodes well for us.
Mm.
But, I think there's going to be a slowdown in transactions here because, mom and pop still think their park's worth what, they were getting unsolicited LOIs for, 125 a pad in Florida. And so
Yeah.
they're like, oh, okay, I still got to get that. And so I think that's going to cause some slowdown in the market. But I think, over time, we're still going to do very well. The equity multiples that we were able to get in a short amount of time, I think that time's going to stretch out, obviously, a little bit. We're not going to be able to create as much value in 12 months. It may take, 36 months, 24 months, or, 48 months, which is still great, by the way. It's still good. But I love this business. And I think, as I mentioned before, with the supply and demand thing being constantly on our side, and there's no affordable housing, multifamily people, you can't permit and build affordable housing and charge, $1,000 a month and the deal makes sense. It's difficult to do that.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a bright future for us for sure.
I love that. Yeah. I like specifically with what's going on in the market. I think there was a graph floating around on Twitter. Credit card debt is like exponentially higher than it was last year, or the year prior, and savings rates have gone down a lot. So, and who gets hit hardest, right? It's the affordable housing, it's the low income people that are living in our parks. So
Yeah.
I think we got to be aware of that. And, some of these rent increases that may have been really nice on the pro forma. I think that also needs to, be readjusted. In addition to the park owned homes and the lease option type of deals that were done, we got to really work with those people, kind of like we did during COVID,
Yeah.
where, hey, we need to do a payment plan or something like that. You had a setback, you had a car, go down or something. So those are some of the stuff we're looking at. But I do agree with you. I think, the long-term, buy and hold model where you're going to hold these things, forever, this is just going to be a temporary little blip where,
Yeah,
you're going to be able to really build a lot of value holding these things long-term.
for sure.
Well, thank you so much, Derek, for all of these golden nuggets. If any of our listeners would like to get a hold of you, what would be the best way for them to do so?
Yeah, so just shoot me an email. It's Derek Vickers 885 at gmail.com. That's DEREK Vickers 885 at gmail.com. And I also post on, I'm on Instagram, TikTok. I'm posting videos around our properties and about crazy things that you see in the operations when I'm out there. And so you can follow me on those. It's Derek Vickers 885 as well. And then on Facebook too. I'm on Facebook.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Derek, for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andrew.
That's it for today, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hey, are you getting value out of this show? If so, would you mind please going over to iTunes and leaving the show a quick 5-star review? I have a goal of hitting over 100 5-star reviews by the end of 2021, and it would mean the absolute world to me if you could help contribute to that. Thanks ahead of time for making my day with your 5-star review of the show.